Hey everybody, my name is Joe Pivarunas. I'm the founder and managing editor of Nanalyze. We're a boutique media and research firm covering disruptive tech stocks for a broad audience of retail and institutional investors across the globe. Today we're going to talk about wine as an asset class and review a platform called Vinovest. Now this is a little bit different from the topics that we're usually discussing on our YouTube channel, but a fair number of subscribers and readers have been asking us about our experience using Vinovest because, as you may or may not know, while we mostly cover tech stocks, they make up about anywhere from 15 to 22% of our overall assets under management at any given time, depending on how the market's doing. So today we want to talk about the platform we use to get exposure to wine. And the story really starts with this gentleman, Anthony Zhang. So he's the founder and CEO of Vinovest. And on the right-hand side here, you can see some of the investors in his firm. So whenever we talk about this platform, and we do a lot because we love it, people are always asking, as they should, who's backing this, right? So Anthony's a serial entrepreneur. He's a very inspiring person, and I didn't know much about him until a couple of years after writing about Vinovest and learning about some of the accomplishments he has. So this is somebody who doesn't sit around and complain about the cards he gets dealt in life. He works hard and makes things happen. So the old saying, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And he has certainly worked very hard. And this is one of a number of ventures that he's started, and this one looks extremely promising. So Anthony had approached us to write about his platform, Vinovest, and this happens quite a bit. We used to do a lot of work relating to what they call affiliate relationships. So lots of firms approach us and say, hey, can you write about our service or product? A very small percentage of these firms will take a look at their product and say, wow, that's actually something interesting we'd like to share with our audience. And Vinovest was one such platform. So I had written this piece myself because I'm particularly interested in wine. I'll put the link to this article in the description of this video. It's a good read. It's quite interesting. And in writing this piece, I started to really become intrigued by Vinovest's platform, in particular, how investment worthy wines aren't that available to, let's say, retail investors and institutional investors, I suppose, and that a lot of times you need connections to get investment worthy wine. So my interest in wine started when I was working as a waiter at this particular restaurant. And this is maybe one of my favorite places in the world. It's no longer a restaurant, it's actually a private residence now, but it's a mansion from 1910. We had our wine cellar in the basement. We served incredibly delicious food, and the clientele that came through here, you wouldn't believe the sorts of individuals that would grace this house with their presence. And I was sort of a Boone's Farm sort of wine drinker until I started drinking a lot of various wines that people would bring in. So we had a corkage fee, and I became familiar with Opus One because I drank so much of it. People would leave, typically, they would leave a glass for the waiter. So maybe they'd bring in a number of bottles for the party, and then towards the end, the host would say, I did a great job and I left you a glass of wine. Or sometimes they wouldn't say anything. And I got to drink a lot of good wine, and that's how I got introduced to it. Not only the wines that guests would bring in, some of which were incredibly expensive, but also the wines in our own cellar. So that was where my interest in wine started. And I think I only ever did anything with my life because I wanted eventually to drink good wine like all the people I saw in this restaurant were doing. So today, wine is now a meaningful part of our portfolio. And you can see here, I've highlighted California. So these are the percentages, regional percentages of our own portfolio. California is heavily weighted because I had originally started using Vinovest because I asked Anthony if he would hook me up with some Opus One, and he found some, and I put in the money and I bought myself a case of Opus One, and that's where it started. And now we have quite the collection going on. It's about 3% of our total assets under management, so not very much relative to what we're managing. People always ask, well, how much money have you made on it? Well, based on what I just looked at before starting this presentation, it's a 12% gain based on money and mark to market. So that's really, in my mind, irrelevant. You should have a 10-year horizon, as you should with any investment. And the one thing I think that's important to remember here is that you need to pay monthly fees. And I think these are very reasonable for what you get. And we'll touch on that a bit later. But that's kind of like a reverse dividend. So we're big advocates of dividend growth investing. Well, this is a investment that actually will slightly erode your wealth. And in my mind, that's perfectly fine for the value we're getting. Now, when you put money on the platform, you need to choose what risk you're going to take. And they don't use these exact labels, but it's more or less high, medium, and low. And I think we ran medium for a while and then switched to low. Um, if you had to sum it up, it's a great way to start a wine collection at a fair price. That's how I see it. And certainly the investing aspects of it are very important as well. So we want to touch really on equally on both those parts. Now let's start by talking a little bit about how this works. You create an account, you fund it with some money, and then you wait. And what they'll do is go out and find wines that fit your risk profile, and they'll add them into your portfolio. And that's extremely fun. So all of a sudden you'll receive an email, you've got a new wine, you go take a look. And I don't know a lot about wine, so every email was something new, more or less. And you go take a look and do a little bit of research and understand why they may have picked that wine. And it's all quite fun. Now, the actual platform or the business model is really, really slick. So there's really three components that I would see on this platform. The first is investability. So if you wanted to invest in wine yourself, that's quite the undertaking. But maybe the first thing that you would ask is, which wines do I invest in? Well, we all know, because we talk about tech stocks all the time, that big data drives AI algorithms. So if you can pump in as much data as possible to some AI algorithms, you can start to gain some real insights. So what they did is they took a large set of big data. There's a lot of it. I just put some examples here: regional popularity, grape popularity, weather each year, production numbers, sales numbers, mentions in wine magazines, things like that. So they put all that data in one place, and then they complemented it with subjective data from sommeliers. And these are individuals that are some of the most elite wine experts on the planet. We'll talk about that in a second. Now, the value of this platform increases over time based on what we know about AI. AI gets better as it learns. So it's able to see outcomes, and then it's able to get better over time. So that's the first component. Second is ownership. For me, this is one of the best parts of the platform, that you own the wine that you invest in. So those bottles actually sit in your name, and the warehouse where they're stored has those listed under your name. The fees that you pay, that we saw on the previous page, those go for storage, insurance, and you can drink your own wine. That's probably one of the best things. I haven't done that. I'd imagine there's going to be some reasonable shipping fees associated with that, seeing that most of the bottles are coming from Europe, but that's an option, and it's a very attractive option. And then you have liquidity. Now, this is something that is rather interesting. So they have let's say they have a little warehouse full of wine, and that it has everybody's names on it. Well, if you have somebody new coming on the platform, and then you have somebody else leaving, well, it's easy enough to switch names and to move bottles around like that. So that sort of liquidity is quite interesting. And they also talk about their own network of buyers and whatnot. And I think that the network they're building is going to be something that you see here. We talk about network effect. Well, the bigger they get, the more options they have in terms of the sort of wines they can buy, their appeal for producers to sell to. And then there's this secondary market, which we're going to talk about, where retail investors or investors of any type can trade wine amongst themselves. Now, you may ask, well, what if I want to sell my wines? And you're going to pay a fee to sell if you've held the wine for less than 3 years. I don't know the details on that because it's not an option that I would pursue. And it'll take them, I have X to X because I looked it up right before the presentation. It'll take them 2 to 3 weeks to sell your bottle. So that liquidity exists. You get your money. But as I said, I think anybody that uses this platform should have a long horizon in mind. Now, this is a documentary I'd suggest you watch. There's at least one familiar face on here, and that gentleman is a advisor for Vinovest. So I think they have at least 2 Master Soms working as advisors, and that's very important. If you're going to invest in wine, you don't just need the big data, you need that subjective assessment from world-class experts. And you can read, this is a fascinating documentary, and it's a must-watch if you love wine. And it talks about how rare these people are. I'm off the top of my head, I think there's somewhere around 280 total, and 30 of those are women. So it's quite a lot of men. Only men will spend that much time drinking, and these individuals, end up landing some of the most elite jobs in the wine industry, clearly. So the fact that such expertise can be found at Vinovest is rather remarkable. Now, talking about performance, look, you can torture the data to make it say anything you want. And I used to work for an index provider that did this all the time. They'd pick some ESG theme, they'd cherry pick some financial data point, and they'd cherry pick some time frame and say that their index outperformed whatever benchmark they cherry picked. You can make the data say anything you want. This is what I think you ought to pay attention to: correlation. So when the markets, there's a bloodbath in the market, wine won't necessarily be following that. So it's not correlated to the S&P 500 or equities. And there's a lot of correlation matrices you can look at that are very interesting. You can do your own research on performance and correlation, but I'll tell you what's really nice. It's nice when you have a portfolio when the tech component is getting decimated like it is today, and then you look at the wine component and everything's just fine and dandy, and some of your wines are going up and some are going down, and it's very nice to have different components of a portfolio aside from just tech stocks. We always tell people to make tech, which is very risky, just a small component of your overall what they call asset class allocation. So you could take a look at that. And when you're doing research on wines, there's a firm called Livex, and I know Vinovest has their own index, and that's great, but this is the, let's say, benchmark for wine around the globe. It's really cool. I don't know how many people know this exists that drink wine and that happen to be investors, but this is darn cool. So you've got the Livex 1000. You can download that spreadsheet, and it'll give you 1,000 different bottles from around the world broken down by region. Americans will be quite surprised to realize that the rest of the world is a very small component of this list of 1,000 wines. So Silicon Valley Napa Valley gets a lot of the press in the States, but the real value in wine can be found across the pond. So, I threw this up here so that you can see they have all that performance information, and you can use that and dissect it and take a look at it and do, as I said, you can torture the data to do whatever you want. But let's get down to brass tacks, talk a little bit about bottles. So these are the best performers that just pulled up some names from our portfolio that were best performers at the time I put this deck together. We have some Cristal there. That's a Magnum on the left, a 2000 Magnum. That's kind of cool. And we have 2010 Dom, and then this French dessert wine on the right. And I'm just going to really try to avoid saying any of these names because I'll just butcher them. And these are the top performers. Again, we don't really pay much attention to this stuff. So I wouldn't say prices are very volatile across the portfolio in total. It's very smooth. So I think that, the performers and the laggards are offsetting each other. We've been buying since, about 2 years now, starting with that Opus One and where we're at today. There was one sale initiated in the portfolio, and I don't recall that a reason was provided for that. I think maybe it was just rapid price appreciation. It was somewhere around a 30% profit, and those bottles were liquidated. We were noted of that. So you look at laggards, these I think would probably account for some of the names maybe that were put in there as a result of putting, medium risk tolerance. So the bottle in the middle there, Tenuta Sanguito, I've actually had. That's a pretty decent wine. You can see here some of these price points are attractive in terms of being able to drink this stuff. What is that, $25 a bottle? That's approachable in terms of price for people like me. Paul Barra, and then you've got this other producer on the right I'm not overly familiar with. I know that the name is relatively popular. Again, go to that Livex 1000, and that's where you can pick up on the names that you ought to know if you say that you know anything about wine. And I certainly don't claim to know anything about wine other than what Vinovest teaches me. So cons of the platform: we don't have insights into liquidity really, or what that exit process looks like. You don't just hold wines forever and they keep getting more expensive. There's an optimal time when you want to sell. And I suppose that they just approach you and say, look, this has reached its optimum point. Do you want to sell? Do you want to drink? So that clearly hasn't happened yet. This is a cash drain, so reverse passive income. If you like wine, I really don't think you're going to get the value out of this platform as you would if you're somebody who doesn't like wine. If you like wine, this platform is mandatory. It's really addicting, and you got to be careful because their marketing team's really good. And before you know it, you find yourself putting money in it every other day. As I always say, I'm like a chocoholic except for wine, and I love everything about wine, drinking it, collecting it, and all the bits. So just be warned about that. They have a transaction log, so you can keep an eye on the amount of money you're putting in. You can see here the last time we put money in, or say the last time we bought was in late last year. And then I put a deposit in not too long ago to cover fees, I think, for the next several years. So the idea being there, all right, let's put this on lockdown and not try to invest any more money in it. Try to keep that around 3% of total assets under management and have enough money in there just to pay the maintenance fees for a while. It's kind of the set it and forget it. Now, problem is that they then released another component of the platform that's very attractive and fun to play with. And we're going to talk about that next. So just looking forward to where they're going, they'll eventually hold a large inventory of wine, as we said around earlier, which they can pass around, and they can start getting economies of scale. You could drink, let's say you have a collection and you want to move it over there. That's not going to be an option, right? Because they can't guarantee the quality of the bottles you have, whether they were stored properly or anything like that. So I don't anticipate any wine ever going in. It's only going to be wine that they acquire and they hold. So wine's always going out. Now, what you could do is if you have a collection, you could drink some of that and ask them to replace it. So that's certainly an option. They're doing other collectibles soon, like whiskey. We're not so keen on that, to be honest. And then they're doing this very cool thing, which is to carve up a case into single bottles and let people buy single bottles and hold them. So they don't need blockchain to do that. They're not using blockchain. It's like Web 3.0 without Web 3.0. So it's really interesting. And that's the second component. So far we've talked about this notion of giving them money and they find the best wines for you to invest in. Then there's this notion of a marketplace where you can start trading wine in, and there's also a community around that. Now, here's an example of marketplace collections. This is how they started. So they'd pick a region, they'd offer a bunch of bottles up, you put some money in, and you could buy one or more bottles. You don't have to buy a case, you could just buy a single bottle if you want. These are kept in a separate portfolio from your managed account, and there's a different fee structure. This is also very attractive in terms if you're somebody that loves wine, because you could just go in there and just buy one or two bottles of something, and it's quite interesting. So the other bit they released with that is the community. This is a forum where you can go in there and post comments, and they're probably going to have some social elements around that where you might be able to share your portfolio with other people and to show them what you have. And certainly you can already start to see quite a bit of humble bragging in there. So if you don't know what humble bragging is, I'll give you an example. This picture here was taken a couple days ago in Krikova wine cellar I visited in Moldova. That's one of the largest wine cellars in the world. And the largest, the Guinness World Records, is actually as Milestimici in Moldova as well. And when I was at Krikova, I saw John Kerry's wine collection here. It's not as impressive. It's a little bit dilapidated. And in that region also, I went to Kevint, which is a cognac producer. You can buy 10-year-old cognacs for about $3. This is in Transnistria, so you may have seen them in the news. There was some false flag operations there, I think a couple weeks ago, was it? And there's a lot of, they talk about a lot of turmoil there, but it's really nice and calm and peaceful. So that region has a lot of interesting wines. That's the sort of commentary you'll see in the Vinovest forums. There are people talking about all the cool wines they drink and the places they go and such. So our marketplace experience, we bought some wines on their marketplace. The first time their Napa Valley, I keep saying Silicon Valley, their Napa Valley collection came out. I'm a huge fan of Napa Valley wines just because I'm an American and that's what I know. And I tried to buy some Dominus. I think it was a 2016 bottle of Dominus, and I looked away from my monitor and the clock, ticked to 11 o'clock when the sale went on. It was sold out in 30 seconds. The entire collection, I think, seriously, was sold out in like a minute and a half. It was crazy. So they did an encore, and then I bought this 2015 Dominus, maybe the bottle that I'm most excited about, or at least, it's like if there are any women watching this presentation, you go into your closet and you look at your shoes and you look at your purses. For men, this is kind of looking at their wine. And this is a bottle I love to look at. It's beautiful. I'm sure it's going to be a great wine to drink. I could certainly not afford to drink wines like these, but and also you may not be able to, because you can't just remove one bottle from a case and have them send it to you. I don't believe that's possible. So you need to consider that. Now, if you're the sort of person that can afford to drink wines like this, you could just buy them by the case, right? So these are some of the wines we bought on the marketplace. It's quite fun. Researching new wines, honestly, probably one of the most enjoyable aspects of the platform for me, because I'm getting exposed to a lot of wines I didn't know anything about. Here you can see where they've put together this kind of a trading exchange. You can see where you might put up a bid to say, I'm willing to pay, $91 for this particular champagne. And then somebody else says, well, I'm willing to sell it, to somebody for 110. And that's your spread, right? And then somebody may decide that they're willing to pay that. And that's just how trading works. So they've set that up. There's not a lot of liquidity from what I can see. It's not as slick as perhaps the secondary market over at Masterworks. I think it could probably use a little bit of work. And what's nice about Vinovest, they're very responsive. I was looking, their team has gotten huge in no time. So I imagine they're going to take the customer feedback they're getting, and this will just get better over time. Now, if you're wondering how to get started, here's what you ought to do. Put in the minimum on the managed side and just see what it's like, if it works for you. If you're somebody who loves wine, I really think you ought to question before you even do it, because it's really enjoyable. I'd say for strategy, you want to go conservative. So go download that LiveX 1000. If you don't know a lot about wine starting out, or even if you do, it's very useful to see the wines that are most traded and to learn about them. And then once you put your money in, it's going to take anywhere from days to weeks for bottles to appear. As I said, their marketing team is very effective. So they'll send out an email, something like, well, you can invest in these rare bottles if you put another $5,000 in the platform. And it starts to get very there's a pull there, and it's very easy to start putting money on this platform. And that's why I think if you could invest in this business, this is a great business. It really has a lot of potential. And as I said, they have this community, they're responsive to client feedback. And I've spoken with their head portfolio manager on numerous occasions about the platform and how it's working, in the direction, the roadmap. And it's very, very engaging to be able to have a conversation with the platform that you're putting money into. Now, the alternatives, and I'd love to have a wine collection, but it's just really tricky. First, if you could figure out what wines to buy, try controlling the environment, right? Now, let's say you're going to put that in your basement, or you're going to put that somewhere in your house. Well, you've got to insure that. So what if the house burns down? And if you're starting to talk some real money, you've got to store those bottles and make sure that they're kept in a way. And then when you actually buy them, how are you going to avoid counterfeits? How are you going to avoid buying a bottle from somebody who didn't keep it right themselves? So the do-it-yourself bit, honestly, even if I had all the resources to build a wine cellar, maintain it, I'd probably opt for this, because I'd rather the experts did that for me. Now, there are some platforms out there, I've seen them advertising. Because I'm a wino, there's ads popping up on social media all the time trying to get my attention. And one of those is a firm called Vivint. I think that's how you say it. I've looked at it. I don't like it. So they'll get a collection of very expensive bottles and divide it up, kind of like Masterworks does with art. They'll divvy it up into shares, and you buy a share of that. Not really, you don't own the wine, you can't drink it. And maybe they'll solve some of these problems. But, Vinovest really is ahead in terms of what a firm that's going to to transform the wine industry ought to do. And you can see this down the road being a platform that's way bigger than it is today in terms of the people that use it. So I haven't seen other platform providers offering anything like what Vinovest offers. And in terms of other options, so remember, the whole conversation today is about an alternative asset class. Well, we hold four. We hold gold, art, wine, and Bitcoin, some Bitcoin. So for art, you've got Masterworks. So if you're somebody looking at one alternative asset class, Masterworks is really slick. And we may do a presentation on that platform, but that lets you invest in art. So you probably want to take a look at those two different things. As I said, if you love wine at all, this is a no-brainer. If you're only interested in the investing aspects of it, it's still really worth a look, because wine is, as an asset class, is very interesting. So make sure that you put any questions or comments that you have in the comment section of this video. And what I've done here is I've put a link which will give you some free months of transaction fees, and do the same for me. So if you enjoyed this presentation, show me some love and click that link. If you sign up for the platform, I'll get some free months. You'll get some free months. Everybody will be happy. Make sure to subscribe to our channel. As I said, we don't really cover things like this very often. When we do, they're certainly enjoyable, which is why this video is coming up on 30 minutes. But we're usually talking about tech stocks. Those videos are very engaging and enjoyable. So make sure you sign up to our channel. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch this video today.